Hello, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings and my segment of what I normally call Responding to the Critics. And we have been involved for a few weeks now in examining the views of Dr. N.T. Wright. And let me say one more time, I admire and appreciate so very, very much a whole lot of his work. Very insightful, very helpful. Now, I've shared with you that in his book on Paul, in his book on Jesus and the victory of God, in his books, Paul and the righteousness of God, in all of those books and more, N.T. Wright sets forth the idea, found in Romans chapter 8, he says, that the time is coming, in which Jesus will return to earth, and the earth will be renovated, recreated, restored to an Edenic perfection. And by that he means, as he terms it, and men such as Richard Middleton, men such as John Garvey, in a 2019 book entitled God's Good Earth. In this book, there's an awful lot that is good, but I find Mr. Garvey's writings to be full, just absolutely chock full of contradictions. Because he says that the original creation was subject to mortality and corruption and death. Well, that would mean that death is not a curse. So if death is not a curse, why does death have to be destroyed? And he sees Genesis 1 as one kind of creation, Genesis chapter 2 as another kind of creation, basically in conflict with each other. But all of that aside, he shares with Wright and others the idea of a yet future redeemed, restored, recreated material creation. Middleton uses the term the entire created cosmos. Wright uses the term the entire created order. So, as I have pointed out before, and I've had people object to me using this terminology, if you're going to argue that one of these days the entire created order, the entire created cosmos is going to be restored, recreated, resurrected, then you are by that very nature, by the very form of your argument, arguing that bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes are one day going to be restored. And this is an area that I see very seldom investigated or discussed in the literature of those who believe in a yet future created, recreated order. They just want to talk about, quote, creation. And even though Wright, in this book on Paul, says that at the coming of the Lord and at the redemption of creation, that the plants will no longer have thorns. And that's about as in-depth as he gets. So anyway, what I've been sharing with you over the last little bit is that when we look at the biblical narrative, we find that this time of the resurrection, which per Wright is the time of the redemption of creation. When we look at these Old Testament passages which discuss the resurrection, which discuss the coming of the Lord, the judgment, and the resurrection, what we discover, which Wright simply does not discuss, but what we discover is that invariably the Old Testament prophets posit that resurrection and thus the redemption of creation at the time of the judgment of Old Covenant Israel, at the time of the, quote, resurrection of Israel through restoration to Yahweh, leading to the nations being invited into Israel's salvation. That's the narrative, ladies and gentlemen. And you have to excuse me, I guess I've got something in my eye that just simply will not leave me alone. Very bothersome. But anyway, so I've been sharing with you some of these Old Testament prophecies of the time of the resurrection that place that resurrection in the context of, number one, the resurrection of Israel through restoration to Yahweh in the new covenant. And by the way, N.T. Wright hints at this repeatedly in his writings, in his discussion of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. He sees this as the prodigal son as symbolizing the return of the 10 northern tribes to Yahweh. That is their resurrection. And he says resurrection was underway. N.T. Wright says on one occasion in a Bamington lectureship, I can give you the source if you wish, if you want that, and discussing his views on resurrection, he says, I did not know at that time, and by the way, he's actually discussing Romans 4 verse 17. He said, I did not know it at that time that resurrection is return from exile. That resurrection is restoration to God. Okay, understanding that, then how do you extrapolate to the resurrection of physical bodies coming out of the ground? Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, in all of these Old Testament prophecies of the resurrection, the restoration of Israel, and thus the resurrection of mankind through Israel, is paramount in the text. And it is invariably posited at the time of the destruction of Old Covenant Israel, the rebellious, and the salvation, the resurrection, is for the righteous remnant of Israel joining with the Gentiles to create a new people. So, all of that. We look, over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at Isaiah chapter 26. Now, I'm only going to just do a really brief survey here of what we've seen. Isaiah chapter 25, the prediction of the resurrection. Isaiah 25 verse 8, that Paul quotes in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 55 and 56 as the source of his resurrection doctrine. So Paul was looking for the fulfillment of Isaiah 25. Well, Isaiah 25 and that promise of the resurrection is, without any doubt whatsoever, posited at the time of the destruction of the city and the temple being turned over to foreigners. Isaiah 25, 1-3. It's also at the time in which the Messianic wedding banquet would be spread and the curse removed, and that banquet would be set on Zion. And Jesus, in Matthew chapter 8, 11, speaking of the centurion and his great faith, he said, I've not found so great faith, no, not in all of Israel. And verily I say to you, many shall come from the east and the west, and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac in the kingdom, and the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out. He is drawing directly on Isaiah 25, verse 6-8. The time of the resurrection is the time of the Messianic banquet. But according to Jesus, the time of the Messianic banquet, when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be resurrected to sit at the banquet, would be when the sons of the kingdom would be cast out. Well, when was that? Well, it wasn't at the cross. It was in AD 70. In Isaiah chapter 26, we have the promise of the resurrection. When would it be? It would be at the coming of the Lord out of heaven to vindicate the blood of the martyrs. Isaiah 26, verse 20 and following. When did Jesus say that all the blood of all the righteous would be vindicated? Oh, in AD 70, Matthew 23, 29 to 37. And then we come into chapter 27. Notice, in Isaiah 26, 20 through 21 now, we have the coming of the Lord, we have the judgment, we have the resurrection, the vindication of the martyrs. Now watch 27:1. In that day, which is the day of the resurrection, which is the time of the redemption of creation. It is the time of the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. Romans 8:23. Pardon me. So there's no question whatsoever about what this is talking about. This is the time of the redemption of creation because it's resurrection. In that day, the Lord with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, that twisted serpent, he will slay the reptile that is in the sea. In that day, sing to her, a vineyard of red wine. I, the Lord, will keep it. I water it every moment, lest any hurt it. I keep it night and day. Fury is not in me. Who would set briars and thorns against me in battle? I would go through them. I would burn them together, or let them take hold of my strength, that he may make peace with me, and he shall make peace with me. So, in the time of the resurrection, which is the coming of the Lord, for the vindication of the martyrs, it is the time of the destruction of Leviathan, and Leviathan is nothing less than, nothing other than, the time of the destruction of Satan. In Revelation chapter 12, Satan is called that great dragon. The great dragon. Now, watch what happens here. In Romans chapter 16, 20, Paul said, and now the God of all peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly. Now watch this. The time of the crushing of Satan is the time of the redemption of creation. N.T. Wright would agree with that. Richard Middleton agrees with that. John Garvey agrees with that. All of those who believe in the time of the redemption of creation, being at the time of the destruction of Satan, are in full agreement on this. But Paul, living 2,000 years ago, said the destruction of Satan was at hand, was coming shortly. Now, the term that Paul uses in Romans 16:20, the God of peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly, is from the Greek word entakai. It is only used very few times in the New Testament, and I want you to listen very carefully to me. You absolutely must catch the power of this. Entakai is never, ever used to emphasize the rapidity of action as opposed to the imminence of the action. In Acts chapter 12, and I'm only going to give an example or two. In Acts chapter 12, Peter is in prison. And he's singing and praying. And an earthquake takes place. The shackles are broken off of him. And an angel walks into the prison cell and says, Peter, arise quickly and depart. Now, are we supposed to believe, and this argument is actually made by many people trying to negate the imminence found in entakai, and they tell us, well, it simply refers to rapidity, has nothing to do with when. And so, according to that argument, here is Peter in prison, wonderful, wonderful accommodations, 5-star accommodations, right? And the angel appears, strikes the chains from off of Peter, and says, Peter, arise and depart quickly. And of course, what that really means is, now Peter, listen to me. Don't worry about when you get up. don't worry about when you leave. I mean, you know, these are such super nice accommodations. So just take your time. If you want to stay here for 20, 30 years, that's cool, no problem. But when you finally do decide to leave, I want you to run as fast as you can. And you say, Preston, you're being a little facetious. Well, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. To drive home the point that the angel was not telling Peter, take your time about when you want to leave, but when you finally make up your mind to leave, then you need to leave as quickly as possible. Likewise, when Paul was in Jerusalem, and the angel appeared to him and told him that many were going to seek his life, and told him, depart Jerusalem quickly. Do you suppose that angel was telling Paul, look, Paul, Jerusalem, you know, that's the center of your faith as a Jew. So hang around long as you want to. Don't worry about when you leave. If you want to stay and observe several feast days, just, you know, stay and enjoy. But when you leave, you need to take the fastest chariot out of town. And again, yes, I'm being a little facetious, but you get the point. Ladies and gentlemen, En Takai emphasizes the imminence, the soonness, the nearness of action. Now, here's what that means. Paul said the crushing of Satan, which is the time of the resurrection, which is the time of the redemption of creation, according to N.T. Wright, Paul said God will crush Satan under your feet shortly. Not rapidly when it finally takes place. Not, he may wait 2,000 or 3,000 years, but when he finally gets around to it, I'm telling you, it's going to take place, boom, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. We don't know when, but boy, it will happen quickly. That really is a nonsensical argument. And it is one, to my knowledge, in my reading of N.T. Wright, perhaps I've overlooked something. It's easy to do. He's a voluminous author. But Wright never discusses this. We'll look at Revelation chapter 12. In Revelation chapter 12, the dragon, unable to consume the child, the man-child, there's a war in heaven and he's cast down to earth. I'm going to begin reading with Revelation chapter 12, 13 and following. When the dragon saw that he had been cast down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the man-child, male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to a place where she is nourished for a time, times and a time, from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth, swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her seed, who keep the commandments of God and who give the testimony of Jesus. Why was the angel so wroth? Well, because verse 12, which I left out, says this: Rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell on the earth. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Now, this is not En Takai, okay? But it tells us that the dragon knew, Satan knew, when he failed to kill Jesus, that he only had a short time until his destruction. So again, ladies and gentlemen, let me make the point. The time of the redemption of creation is the time of the destruction of Satan. The time of the destruction of Satan was when? It was coming soon in Romans 16:20. It was to be in a little while in Revelation 12, verse 7. Or verse 12, excuse me. Now watch this. We go to Revelation chapter 20. In Revelation chapter 20, we have the vision of the battle of Gog and Magog. No, that's not the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. At the end of the millennium, Satan is destroyed. Now look, I don't know of anybody that denies that, okay? Verse 10, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. At the end of the millennium, Satan would be destroyed. Now watch this. Then I saw a great white throne, and the one who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the earth fled away. There was found no place for them. I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God. And the books were open, and another book was open, and it's the book of life. Now watch this. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things were written in the books. Now this is at the time in which the sea gave up the dead that was in it. Next verse. Once again, this is at the end of the millennium. Well, what would happen at the end of the millennium? The dead would be judged according to their works. Well, in Matthew 16, 27 and 28, Jesus said, the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according to his works. Oh, every man according to his works. And verily I say unto you, ladies and gentlemen, that little term, Greek term, amin lego humin, that begins verse 28, ties verse 28 to verse 27. It tells us verse 28 is emphasizing verse 27. That means that whatever verse 28 is saying, it is emphasizing verse 27. Verily I say unto you, there are some standing here. That was 2,000 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. Which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Why was he coming in his kingdom? To judge every man according to his works. That's Revelation chapter 22, or 20, verse 12. When would it take place? In the lifetime of that first century audience. Oh, but we're not done. Look at Revelation 22, verse 10. Behold, or John was told, do not seal the vision of this book, because the time is at hand. Verse 12, behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according to his works. Wait a minute. The time is at hand. I come quickly. Oh, in takai. In takai. Not rapidly, soon. And so we have here all of this insurmountable evidence, ladies and gentlemen. And oh, by the way, what follows this destruction of Leviathan? The new heaven and new earth. You know, the redemption of creation. The new creation. When would it take place? At the time of the judgment of every man according to his works. But Jesus said the judgment of every man according to his works would be in the first century generation. Later in that very generation, he said, behold, I come quickly. The time is at hand. Now, what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that no matter what our concept of the nature of the redemption of creation might be, Jesus said it was going to happen when the sons of the kingdom were cast out, Matthew 8:11. Jesus said it was going to happen in the lifetime of the first century saints John was told, or Paul said, that destruction of Satan was coming quickly, soon, shortly, not rapidly. And John was told in Revelation, the time is at hand, and Jesus reiterated his words from Matthew 16, 27 and 28, and said, behold, I come quickly. That means, without any doubt whatsoever, ladies and gentlemen, once again, no matter what our concept of the nature of the redemption of creation might be, Jesus said it, Isaiah said it even, Paul said it, John said it. That redemption, that new creation was near, not far off, coming soon, quickly and shortly, 2,000 years ago. Strangely enough, unless I missed it, you will not find N.T. Wright discussing and addressing these indisputable texts from Jesus and his apostles. I've not found any discussion of these temporal delimitations. I think that's very telling. And I think it completely falsifies N.T. Wright's view of the new creation. I'm out of time. Thanks for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. You have a fantastic weekend. God bless. See you on Monday.